In the winter of 1943, 3 million people starved to death in Bengal while the British Empire was sitting on rice, not running out of rice, not unable to find rice, sitting on it. Historians point to wartime supply disruptions, Japanese naval blockades, and a collapse in local purchasing power. But there is one cause that rarely makes the textbook: rice. Specifically, a series of decisions by the Churchill government to prioritize rice exports to European theaters over feeding a province of 60 million people on the grounds that Indian civilians were less strategically valuable than British soldiers. Today, you can buy a 2-pound bag of jasmine rice for under $2 at any grocery store, and most people have never once thought about who controls it: music. So how did this single grass seed go from being the most politically explosive substance in human history to something you dump in a pot and forget about? To understand rice, you have to start with biology. Your body cannot store more than about 400 grams of glucose at any one time, roughly the amount in 2 cups of cooked rice. Your muscles need it to contract. Your brain needs it to stay conscious. Your organs need it to keep running the 10,000 processes that happen every second without you noticing. Without glucose, your body does not slow down gracefully. It collapses. Cognition fails first, then muscle coordination, then organ function. Severe starvation can kill a person in weeks, but it makes them incapable of defending themselves, working, or fighting within days. This is not a slow process. This is why every army in history that wanted to destroy an enemy without fighting them went straight for the grain supply. But rice does something no other staple grain can. It grows in standing water. It colonizes flooded delta land, acidic soils, waterlogged coastal margins, environments where wheat dies, where millet withers, where almost nothing else produces a reliable calorie. It carries thiamine vitamin B, one whose absence causes beriberi, a neurological collapse that paralyzed entire navies before anyone understood why. The Japanese Imperial Navy lost more sailors to beriberi in the 1880s than to enemy fire, until a naval surgeon named Takaki Kanehiro realized that switching from polished white rice to barley stopped the dying. He did not know the mechanism. He just knew it worked. The body had been sending that signal for 10,000 years. And some animals understood it long before any human surgeon did. Sika deer in the Nara Basin of Japan have been observed for centuries, making deliberate seasonal migrations to specific mineral-rich clay deposits along the Yoshino River, not to drink, but to eat the clay itself, correcting trace mineral deficiencies that their rice paddy-adjacent grazing grounds could not supply. They wade into the shallows. They press their muzzles into the riverbank. They eat the earth. Wildlife managers initially assumed disease. Then they realized the deer were self-medicating, driven by the same biological signal that first pulled human foragers into the grass at the edge of the floodplain. Humans watched. And then they followed. Music. Some of the earliest evidence of deliberate rice cultivation comes from a site called Hemudu, in the lower Yangtze River Valley of what is now Zhejiang Province, China, where archaeologists have recovered cultivated rice husks and farming tools dating to approximately 5,000 years before the Common Era. That makes organized rice farming older than the Egyptian pyramids by a margin of nearly 2,000 years. But the Yangtze was not working alone, simultaneously, independently, with no contact between the two populations. Communities in the Ganges, plain of what is now northeastern India, were cultivating a different subspecies, Oryza sativa indica, from a separate wild ancestor. 2 continents, 2 river systems, the same convergent obsession. Neither group taught the other. The grain was simply that good. These were not casual experiments. Communities permanently abandoned mobile foraging to settle beside the flood margins where rice grew best. The earliest hydraulic engineering in Asia, the networks of earthen dikes, sluice gates, and diversion channels that archaeologists now find beneath modern Chinese cities, was not built to prevent flooding. It was built to control it, to hold the water on the paddies for exactly the number of days the rice needed, then drain it before harvest. The grain did not follow civilization. Civilization followed the grain. But farming rice in a flooded paddy is one thing. Turning it into a commodity that could be stored across a famine year, transported across mountain ranges, and taxed by a government that had never seen the paddy it was extracting from, that required something else entirely. It required technology, organization, and eventually bureaucratic control so sophisticated it has never been fully replicated. While developing ceramic storage vessels sealed with pine resin to keep harvested rice dry through the humid Yangtze summers, potters in the Hemudu culture, around 4500 BCE, discovered that rice grain left in imperfectly sealed containers did something unexpected. It fermented. The liquid that resulted was stable, mildly intoxicating, and crucially did not spoil the way cooked grain did. They had stumbled into alcohol. The earliest chemically confirmed rice wine in the archaeological record, found at the Jiahu site in Henan province and dated to approximately 7000 BCE, predates grape wine by more than 2000 years. Every sake brewery in Japan, every rice lager in Southeast Asia, every bottle of Shaoxing wine in a Chinese kitchen cabinet is the direct descendant of an accident in a storage jar. The government noticed, by the time of the Zhou dynasty, around 1000 BCE, Chinese rulers had encoded the relationship between rice and political legitimacy into the ritual architecture of the state itself. The Sheji, the altar of grain and soil, stood at the center of every Zhou capital. To destroy an enemy state was not to kill its king, it was to demolish its grain altar. The king's primary ritual obligation was not military, it was agricultural, performing the spring plowing ceremony to guarantee the harvest. And the first instrument of state power was not an army, it was the census of paddies. Officials recorded not the number of people in a province, but the number of met of cultivated rice land. From that single number, they calculated everything else: taxes, labor obligations, military levies, and the probability of revolt if the harvest failed. The rice paddy was the empire made legible and measurable. The Han dynasty, around 200 BCE, went further. The ever-normal granaries Changping-Kang were perhaps the most sophisticated price stabilization mechanism in the ancient world. The state bought rice when harvests were large and prices low, filling granaries against scarcity. When harvests failed and prices rose, it sold from reserves, suppressing the panic that turned food shortages into rebellions. A government minister named Sang Hongyang argued explicitly in 81 BCE that the grain monopoly was preferable to direct taxation precisely because farmers could not evade it. By moving, a man could flee a head tax, but he could not carry his paddy with him. The penalty for granary officials who allowed reserves to fall through corruption was not administrative censure, it was execution. For the next 2000 years, every major dynasty in China built its legitimacy on this same foundation. Control the rice, control the people. Lose the rice, lose the mandate. The Japanese took this logic and made it literal. The Ritsuryo legal codes of the 7th century CE measured all wealth, all power, and all obligation, not in coins or land area, but in koku, the volume of rice required to feed one adult for 1 year, approximately 180 liters. A samurai's salary was a number of koku. A feudal lord's power was the koku rating of his domain. The Tokugawa shogunate's survey of 1598 calculated that the Japanese archipelago produced approximately 18.5 million koku per year. From that single number, the government derived every military, financial, and political calculation for the next 2.5 centuries. Not metaphorically, literally. The entire institutional architecture of feudal Japan was a rice accounting system. Now think about this. In Japanese, there is a single word gohan that means cooked rice. But gohan also means breakfast. It means lunch. It means dinner. It means any meal, at any hour, regardless of what is on the table. Not because rice happens to accompany Japanese meals, but because for 1,000 years, a meal without rice was not a meal. It was a gap. It was the kind of absence that a Koku system made visible and measurable and politically dangerous. The language encoded that logic so deeply that it survives today in the mouth of every Japanese person who has never once thought about the Tokugawa census. Every time someone in Tokyo says they are going to eat dinner, the word that comes out means rice. The grammar assumes it is there. The language has not forgotten what the culture thinks it has moved on from. While China was perfecting its granary bureaucracy, another network was forming across one of the most extreme maritime environments on Earth. The Austronesian expansion, beginning around 3000 BCE from the coast of what is now Taiwan, was the largest voluntary human migration in history before the age of sail. Over 3,000 years, Austronesian-speaking peoples in outrigger canoes colonized every habitable island from Madagascar to Easter Island, a maritime territory larger than all the world's landmasses combined. They did not sail empty. They sailed with pigs, with taro, and with rice sealed in ceramic jars packed in dry sand to survive months at sea. Every island they landed on, they planted. The rice did not follow the migration. The rice was the reason for it. The Moroccan scholar Ibn Battuta, traveling through the port of Calicut on the Malabar coast of India in 1341 CE, described a harbor so dense with ships from China, Arabia, East Africa, and the Persian Gulf that it looked, he wrote, like a floating city. What he was looking at was the terminus of the Indian Ocean rice trade. A single Chinese treasure junk of the Yongle era could carry 600 tons of husked rice, enough to feed a city of 10,000 people for a month. The route from the rice surplus Irrawaddy Delta of Burma to the rice deficit populations of the Arabian Peninsula was not a trade route that incidentally carried rice. Rice was the route. The ports existed because of it. The monsoon navigation charts the accumulated knowledge of seasonal wind patterns that allowed sailors to cross open ocean and return, were developed and refined over centuries by merchants who needed to move grain before it spoiled. The spices came later. The silk came later. Rice built the infrastructure that everything else used. In the markets of pre-colonial Java, rice was the numeraire, the unit of account against which all other prices were expressed. A bolt of Sumatran pepper was worth a specific volume of Javanese rice. A Chinese porcelain jar was worth a specific weight of Burmese paddy. The great port cities, Malacca, Banten, Ayutthaya, were not rich because they grew rice. They were rich because they sat at the point where rice surplus regions met rice deficit regions and extracted a percentage of everything that crossed the boundary. The sultans of Mataram in central Java expressed their military power not as troop numbers, but as rice production. A ruler who controlled the most productive paddies could feed the largest army. Rice was exchanged for everything else, not as one commodity among many, as the foundation beneath all exchange, not metaphorically, literally. And this is where rice begins to determine the outcome of wars fought by people who never once thought about grain. In the spring of 1942, Japanese military planners faced a logistics problem of staggering scale. The Imperial Army had just seized territory, stretching from Burma to the Philippines to the Dutch East Indies, a chain of islands and coastlines covering more geography than the entire continental United States. To hold it, they needed to feed occupation forces, extract resources, and suppress resistance simultaneously. Their solution was rice. They imposed systematic rice procurement across every occupied territory, fixed prices below market, mandatory sale quotas, severe penalties for hoarding. In the Philippines, a cavern of rice, about 44 kilograms, had sold for approximately 2 pesos before the occupation. By 1944, the same volume was selling on the black market for over 200 pesos, where it could be found at all. In Vietnam, Japanese rice requisitioning combined with a catastrophic 1944 harvest to produce a famine that killed an estimated 2 million people in 4 months. The American OSS operatives who arrived in northern Vietnam in 1945 found a countryside where people had stripped the bark from trees to eat it. Families had sold their farming tools to buy grain at black market prices, then could not plant the following season. Women in the Red River Delta were documented boiling the leather straps from their ox yokes. It was never enough. General Vo Nguyen Giap later wrote that the famine radicalized the Vietnamese peasantry more thoroughly than any political argument his movement had ever made. The Viet Minh did not win the countryside by promising liberation. They won it by distributing rice from seized Japanese granaries. Some historians argue that Japanese rice policy created the preconditions for Vietnamese independence more decisively than any battlefield outcome in the entire war. Wars are won by logistics, and in Southeast Asia, logistics was rice. Ho Chi Minh understood this. He understood that rice was not just a commodity, but a symbol. Every Vietnamese farmer, city worker, soldier, mandarin ate rice 3 times a day. The rice paddy was not just the landscape, it was the economy. It was the body. It was the thing a colonial government controlled when it wanted to control everything else without admitting what it was doing. And the injustice of watching a foreign power requisition that rice at gunpoint while children died at the roadside was not something that required a political education to feel. It required only a stomach, music. On the 2nd of September 1945, Ho Chi Minh stood in Ba Dinh Square in Hanoi. Before him, several 100,000 people. In his hand, a single sheet of paper, handwritten the night before. He unfolded it. He read the opening lines of the American Declaration of Independence. Then he stopped. He looked up. He waited. It was an almost absurdly simple gesture, a pause, a glance upward from a page. But in that silence, before he said another word, every farmer in that crowd who had eaten bark to survive the 1945 famine, every woman who had boiled leather to feed her children, every man who had watched soldiers carry rice out of a village that was already starving, all of them understood what was coming next, not as a political argument. As a physical fact, the rice would be theirs. Within 3 months, Viet Minh networks had organized rice redistribution across 6 provinces. Within 3 years, the French, who had returned expecting a colonial relationship, found themselves fighting a population for whom the political and the agricultural had become the same thing. The First Indochina War did not end colonialism in Southeast Asia overnight. But the promise made in Ba Dinh Square shattered the moral foundation of every colonial rice procurement system from Hanoi to Jakarta in a way that no army and no administrator could ever repair. All because of rice. And then, almost anticlimactically, rice stopped being scarce. In 1966, plant breeders at the International Rice Research Institute in Los Baños, Philippines released a hybrid variety called IR8. It was shorter than traditional rice, a semi-dwarf bred to hold its head upright under the weight of heavy fertilization without collapsing. Under optimal conditions, IR8 yielded 10 tons per hectare. Traditional varieties yielded 2. A single Philippine farm running IR8 could produce in one season what the same land had produced across 5. India, which had been dependent on American emergency grain shipments to survive, achieved self-sufficiency by 1974. The specter of continental famine that had haunted Asian governments since the Zhou dynasty receded within a single decade. Today, the world produces approximately 520 million metric tons of milled rice every year. The commodity price on global futures markets sits at roughly $400 per metric ton, which works out to about 20 cents per pound. The same grain that the Han dynasty taxed to fund military campaigns, that the Tokugawa shogunate used to calculate the military power of every feudal domain, that Japanese occupation forces weaponized to break resistance movements across Southeast Asia. That grain now trades at a price so low it does not register as a line item in most household budgets. The same mineral that built civilizations is now being sold in bulk at warehouse stores and dumped in school cafeterias and forgotten in the back of pantry shelves until it goes stale. Most people who eat it twice a day have never once thought about what it costs to produce. That is, in one sense, the greatest logistical achievement in agricultural history. In another sense, it is the story of how completely a civilization can forget what it once almost lost. And there is something both wonderful and strange about that. For thousands of years, rice shaped the fate of nations. It determined which river valleys became the cores of civilizations and which ones remained jungle. It decided which armies could sustain a monsoon campaign and which ones dissolved into dysentery and starvation. It defined the legal structure of Japanese feudalism, the ritual legitimacy of Chinese emperorship, and the political vocabulary of every independence movement from India to Indonesia. People were taxed for it, starved for it, and organized across entire provinces to reclaim their right to grow it and sell it at a price that let them live. Kings stored it in sealed granaries and used its scarcity as a weapon. Emperors built entire bureaucracies to count it, move it, and extract a percentage of it. Revolutionaries distributed it from seized warehouses and won wars without firing a shot. And now, you can find it in a resealable plastic bag at the back of a gas station, and nobody considers this remarkable. That gap between what rice once was and what it is now tells you something important about how civilizations work. The things that feel permanent and inevitable, the power structures, the hierarchies, the economic systems built on controlling who eats and who does not, they are built on foundations that can dissolve within a single generation. The Han granary system felt permanent. The koku economy of feudal Japan felt permanent. The idea that controlling rice automatically conferred the right to govern felt permanent. None of it was. You can see this pattern repeating with other resources. Data, specifically the behavioral and biological data harvested by platform technology and pharmaceutical companies, now dominates the global economy the way rice once dominated Asia. The companies that control the most of it are, in the language of another era, the ones with the largest granaries. They set the terms. They determine access. They extract a percentage of everything that crosses their infrastructure. But technology is already changing the equation. Just as IR8 changed it for rice, decentralized computation and open biological databases may one day make proprietary data hoarding as economically irrelevant as the Tokugawa rice census, probably sooner than most people expect. Rice did not stop mattering because the body needs it less. Your body needs it exactly as much as a Himudu farmer's body did 7,000 years ago. What changed was access. The scarcity that made it a political instrument was not natural. It was engineered, maintained by geography, by monopoly, by the deliberate restriction of the seeds, the water, and the knowledge needed to grow more of it. When the engineering changed, the scarcity dissolved. So, the next time you measure out 2 cups of dry white rice and tip them into a pot of water, feel how light they are in your palm, how each grain weighs almost nothing, how the whole handful barely registers. Take a second to think about what you are holding. You are holding a grass seed that built every major civilization east of the Indus River. That crossed 4,000 miles of open ocean in ceramic jars on outrigger canoes. That paid samurai salaries, funded Han military campaigns, and denominated the power of every feudal lord in Japan for 2.5 centuries. That was requisitioned at gunpoint and distributed from seized granaries and promised back to the people who grew it in a square in Hanoi on the day a country was born. A handful of it, almost weightless. All of human history compressed into a grain so small it dissolves before you notice it's gone. If you found this surprising, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling us which part of rice's history surprised you the most. We have plenty more stories like this one coming, so make sure you do not miss them.